a slap across the face, a look that said she didn't belong. But she wasn't just another black woman in a courtroom. She was the judge. And 4 minutes later, the empire behind that racist cop began to crumble. You thought this was about one mistake? No, this was the spark of a justice revolution. The morning air in Atlanta was heavy with humidity, yet Ava Morgan walked with a light stride. At 32, she was one of the youngest black women to ever serve as a state judge. But today she wore no robe, just a navy blouse under a gray blazer, hair pulled into a neat bun. She liked blending in. As her silver Camry hummed through a quiet side street, she noticed a police cruiser 2 cars behind. No siren, no horn, just watching. She turned on her signal, checked her mirrors, made a lawful right turn. Still the lights flashed. Ava pulled over beside a gas station, hands on the wheel, fingers at 10 and 2. She had given this lecture 100 times to her law students, to her little cousin, to herself. Through the side mirror, she saw a white male officer in his 30s storming toward her car, jaw clenched. His name tag read Winters. Before she could lower her window, he yanked the door open. "You in a hurry or something?" he barked. Ava's voice was calm. "Good morning, officer. May I ask why license and registration?" Now she reached slowly, but her calmness seemed to anger him more. As Ava carefully reached into her purse, narrating every move, Officer Winters leaned closer, breath sour with stale coffee. "Don't be cute," he sneered. "You think you're clever, huh?" She kept her gaze steady. "I'm complying, officer." But it didn't matter. With a jerk, he yanked the door wider, hand hovering too close to his holster. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Ava nodded silently, unbuckled her seatbelt, and stepped out. Her heels touched the pavement with quiet precision. Then it happened. A slap. Loud. Violent. Shocking. It rang across the lot like a gunshot. Her head whipped to the side. Pain bloomed across her cheek. Her blazer slipped off one shoulder. Gasps echoed. A woman at the pump dropped her coffee. A teenager froze, earbuds dangling. Winters stood there, breathing hard, like he'd won something. Ava straightened. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked him straight in the eye and said with a voice as sharp as cut glass, "You just assaulted a sitting judge." The color drained from his face. He thought she was just another black woman on the road. But she wasn't. She was the storm he never saw coming. The silence that followed cracked louder than the slap itself. Ava didn't move. She didn't touch her cheek. Instead, with calm fury, she reached into her blazer. A gold badge glinted in the sun, the seal of the state judiciary. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." A man pulled out his phone and started filming. Another called 911. Cameras were everywhere now. Winters took a step back, visibly shaken. You don't look like a judge," he muttered. Ava's voice sliced through him. "And what does a judge look like to you?" He had no answer. His fingers twitched again near his holster, but didn't move. Sirens wailed in the distance. Then came a police SUV, tires screeching, doors flung open. 2 officers emerged, hands ready, eyes scanning. "Officer Winters just assaulted me," Ava declared. "I am Judge Ava Morgan of the state judiciary." The male officer blinked twice. His partner froze. "Is this for real?" she whispered. Ava held her badge high, letting it gleam in the morning sun. And just like that, the power shifted. In the space of a heartbeat, Winters went from enforcer to offender. And the whole city was about to see it. As more units arrived, tension thickened like summer heat. The gas station manager ran out shouting, "I got cameras. It's all recorded." Officer Winters looked around, panic creeping in. He wasn't in control anymore. The script had flipped. Ava stood firm, arms crossed, her badge still visible. Her cheek throbbed, but she refused to show pain. A female officer, Sanders, approached cautiously. "Ma'am, are you injured?" Ava didn't flinch. "Yes, he struck me, open-handed, unprovoked." Sanders' face went pale. "EMS is on the way," she said softly. "We're going to handle this." Ava nodded once. "I'll wait here until your lieutenant arrives. I'm not going anywhere." And then black SUV tires squealed into the lot. Out stepped Lieutenant Marcus Riker. Sharp suit, no nonsense, his jaw clenched when he saw Ava. "Judge Morgan?" he asked. She turned, revealing the red swelling handprint on her cheek. The look on his face changed everything. He wasn't just angry. He was stunned. And in that moment, the world knew this wasn't a traffic stop anymore. This was the unraveling of everything Officer Winters thought would always protect him. But Ava, she wasn't there to scream. She was there to dismantle. Lieutenant Riker's face was stone. "What happened here?" he asked low, barely holding back fury. Before Winters could speak, Ava answered calm but commanding. "This officer pulled me over without cause, forced me out of my vehicle, and struck me before verifying my identity." Phones buzzed. Cameras zoomed in. Winters stammered. I didn't know who she was." Riker turned to him, eyes burning. "And if you had, that would have made it okay." Winters had no answer. Ava stepped forward. Her voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to. My identity doesn't excuse what you did. It just makes it impossible for you to deny it." The weight of her words settled over the crowd like fog. Riker exhaled slowly. "Hand over your weapon and badge," he said. "What, Lieutenant, you can't. I just did." Winters hesitated, then unclipped his badge, his sidearm, his power placing them into Riker's hands like surrendering a crown. And just like that, the empire of silence built over years began to crack. Ava didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Because justice, when it arrives in the hands of the silenced, doesn't whisper. It echoes. As Winters was led away by Officer Sanders, Ava remained still. The slap still burned not just on her skin, but in her soul. Lieutenant Riker turned to her, voice low. "Medical is on the way, ma'am. I'm deeply sorry." Ava nodded once. Her voice cracked just slightly. "See that it's handled." Then from the edge of the gathering crowd, a voice cut through. "Ma'am," said a mechanic in oil-streaked overalls, maybe in his 50s, holding up his phone. "I got the whole thing, every second. You're not alone in this." Ava turned to him. His eyes were weathered kind. She saw not just a man, but a witness, a citizen, a protector of truth. "Thank you," she said quietly. "They need to see it," he added. "They need to see what really happened out here." His words hit deeper than any legal brief, because this wasn't just about her anymore. The truth wasn't only written in law books or sealed in courtrooms. It was captured by trembling hands on cracked phone screens from people who had seen too much and finally had something worth standing for. The paramedics arrived. One of them, a young black woman with gentle hands and steady eyes, approached Ava cautiously. "Mind if I take a look?" she asked, kneeling beside her like a sister, not a stranger. Ava nodded. The medic's gloved fingers gently traced the curve of the bruise now blooming across Ava's cheek. But it wasn't pain that Ava felt. It was resolve. This was no longer about a single slap. It was about every bruise that went unrecorded, every voice dismissed, every headline that never made the evening news. The crowd had grown. Reporters arrived, cameras blinking like electric eyes. People were whispering Ava's name, some in disbelief, others in awe. Lieutenant Riker stood nearby, fielding questions he wasn't ready to answer. And Ava. She stood bruised but unbowed, eyes fixed not on what had happened, but on what would come next. She had no robe on that day, but her presence alone had become a verdict against silence. And somewhere deep in her chest, she felt that the system wasn't just watching anymore. It was cracking. And she was the weight pressing down. Hours later, Ava sat inside a sterile police station, fluorescent lights buzzing above her like angry wasps. The bruise on her face had darkened to a violent purple. Every twitch of her jaw sent needles of pain down her neck. But she sat straight, composed. Outside the interview room, Lieutenant Riker was on the phone, pacing hard. Every call was an emergency now. The video, the one from the mechanic's phone, had been sent to every news outlet in Georgia. Within an hour, it had spread across the country. A black female judge, slapped in public. On camera, Riker stepped inside. The Attorney General saw it, he said, voice low. "They're calling it a potential civil rights violation. FBI's been looped in." Ava stared at him. "Good, it should be," he sighed. "The mayor and council want to meet you." "I'm not here to comfort them," she replied coldly. "I'm here to make sure this never happens again." And in that moment, Lieutenant Riker saw her not just as a judge, but as the reckoning they'd all been trying to outrun. But Ava had stopped running. Now it was their turn. They tried to contain it. City officials issued carefully worded statements. Local media tried to call it an incident, but it was too late. The people had seen the footage, the slap, the badge, the disbelief on Winter's face, the power shift. By morning, protesters gathered in front of the courthouse. Signs read, "We stand with Judge Morgan." Others said justice isn't a costume. Ava didn't ask for it, but she had become a symbol, not of revenge but of awakening. At her home, her inbox flooded with thousands of messages. Some were from law students, some from mothers, some from men who had been silenced and never believed. One message read simply, "You survived what I couldn't. Thank you for standing." That night, Ava sat on her porch, coffee untouched, phone buzzing beside her. She wasn't afraid. She was exhausted. Not from the fight, but from how expected it had all become. The violence, the denial, the apology too late. She whispered to the night air, "Not this time." And the silence whispered back, "Then burn it down." The next morning, Ava walked into the federal courthouse, not to preside, but to file. In her hands, a formal petition for an external investigation. Not just into Winters, but into the department that trained him. The prosecutors who shielded him. The judges who looked away. She dropped the file on the clerk's desk like a hammer. "Please log this as urgent." The woman behind the desk wide-eyed nodded. Carter, her longtime bailiff and quiet protector, waited nearby. "They'll come after you," he said. "They already have," she replied. He handed her a small envelope. "Someone left this in your mailbox." Inside, a photo of her nephew walking home from school. A single line was scrawled on the back, "Stay in your lane." Ava stared at it, not trembling, not crying, just still. Then she handed it back to Carter. "Call the U.S. Marshals," she said, "because if they want war, I want witnesses." Carter didn't ask questions, because he knew when a woman like Ava Morgan stops asking for protection, she becomes it. Ava stared out the window of her chambers, the city below buzzing like a stirred hive. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. The picture of her nephew haunted her desk. A silent threat, a coward's message. She didn't call her sister. She didn't cry. She called the U.S. Marshals, and they came. 3 agents. One black woman named Agent Pierce, quiet but commanding, stood before her with unwavering eyes. "You're not just a target," Pierce said. "You're the fuse." They set up protection for her family, her home, her office. But no fortress could protect Ava from what she just realized. They weren't afraid of her badge. They were afraid of her voice. She looked at Carter. "I'm not backing down." He nodded. "Then we go all in." And with that, Ava unlocked a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside, notes, recordings, whispered stories from courthouse hallways. Things she'd never dared write down until now. Because now the silence was lethal, and she would not let it kill again. That night, Ava's name trended on social media, but not all of it was praise. A smear article surfaced. "Judge Ava Morgan under scrutiny for previous court bias." No evidence. No context. Just poison. Then came the bots. Hashtags. Accusations from anonymous profiles. They called her radical, dangerous, unfit. One post featured an old photo of her protesting in college, arm raised fierce and free. They twisted it into a weapon. Even her nephew's school received a call. Is the boy being indoctrinated? That one broke her, not because it frightened her, but because it was so familiar. They weren't coming for her rulings. They were coming for her humanity. "They're going to burn your legacy," Carter warned, a voice rough. Ava didn't blink. "Then we rebuild it in stone." She opened a small black binder, her own silent archive of corruption and justice, and whispered threats from those who wore suits but carried daggers. "They want a war of narratives," she said. "Let's give them the truth, and let's make it hurt." The black binder wasn't just a collection of documents. It was dynamite. A decade of details, misconduct, ignored complaints, buried names, whispered but never spoken aloud. It held connections between Officer Winters and key city officials. It referenced prosecutors who refused to press charges, judges who looked away. One name made Ava pause. Judge Harold Prescott, a man who once mentored her, who called her a daughter of justice. His name appeared 3 times. 3 dismissed complaints, all tied to officers who'd later be quietly promoted. She closed the binder. Her hands trembled. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I just wanted fairness. A fair bench." Carter leaned forward. "But they built it on silence, Ava. And you're the first one to speak in decades." She stood, her voice steady. "Then let's give them a voice they can't erase." Outside, protesters chanted her name. But inside, Ava was preparing not for applause. She was preparing for confrontation. The next morning, Ava walked into the courtroom without her robe. Who to preside? Not today. Today she came to fight. She faced the ethics board, the press, and a stone-faced assistant district attorney named Michael Reyes. He tried to keep his smile polite. "Judge Morgan," he began, "we're here to evaluate your emotional fitness after the incident." Ava didn't sit. She didn't smile. "I am recusing myself from the Winters trial," she said calmly, "not because I am emotionally compromised, but because I refuse to let you bury this quietly." The room shifted. Reyes blinked. "Then what exactly are you asking for?" Ava handed Agent Pierce a file. She opened it slowly. Inside, sealed complaints, unedited footage, financial records connecting Officer Winters to a private defense fund funded by city contracts. And another document, a surveillance transcript, Winters bragging. "She's got a badge. Let her try me. I got friends higher than her." Reyes paled. Ava's voice thundered. "Today is not about a slap. It's about what happens when you believe your power is untouchable. Well, we're here to prove it bleeds." By the time Ava finished her testimony, the room was no longer silent. It was breathless. She faced the press. Her voice didn't shake. "I have submitted every name, every complaint, every buried case. And I am requesting a federal review of all convictions tied to Officer Winters and his network of collaborators." Someone gasped. A journalist whispered, "This could shut the city down." Ava heard him, and she turned to the crowd. "Then let it, because this wasn't about a badge. It was about dignity, belonging, truth that had been starved for air and now had fire in its lungs." As she stepped away from the microphone, her phone buzzed. A text. No name. Just 5 chilling words. "You need to stop, now." She showed it to Carter. He looked at her. "Do we stop?" Ava stared out the courthouse window, her reflection sharp against the glass. "No," she whispered. "We keep going, until there's nothing left to hide." Part 16. The message that crossed the line. The next morning, a package arrived at Ava's chambers. No return address, no markings. Inside a photo, her nephew, walking home from school, on the back scribbled block letters. "Stay in your lane." For a second, Ava couldn't breathe. Not because of fear, but because of fury. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was war. She called Carter into the room and showed him. His jaw locked. "We have to move your family." Ava didn't argue. "Call the marshals. And call Agent Pierce. This just escalated." She turned to the window. Someone out there thought she could be silenced with fear. That one photograph would unravel her. But all it did was ignite her deeper. "I'm not stepping back," she said. "I'm stepping up." Because now it wasn't just about justice. It was about protection. Of family. Of truth. Of every person who ever whispered, someone should say something. She was that someone. And now there was no turning back. That night, Boon was moved. Not officially, not with paperwork. Just relocated. Back hallways. No explanations. A burner phone, a car, and a folder. Inside, Ava Morgan's address. Family details. Photos. Her nephew's school. Boon's hands trembled. "This is surveillance," he muttered. A man in a gray suit stood beside the vehicle. Calm. Cold. Anonymous. "This is leverage," he said. Boon recoiled. "You want me to threaten a judge?" "No," the man replied. "We want you to remind her where power comes from. Fear." Boon stared at him. This wasn't a rescue. This was a test. "If I do this," he asked, "you get a lifeline, a private security contract, no prison, no press. And if I don't," the man smiled, "then you rot here forgotten." As the car door shut and the city swallowed him again, Boon realized this wasn't about one slap anymore. This was about preserving the machine that made it possible, and they were willing to destroy anyone to keep it running. The following morning, Ava stood in front of the courthouse mirror. She stared at herself not as a judge, not as a victim, but as a line no one else dared to cross. Carter stepped in. "Your sister's safe. Marshals are in place." Ava nodded. He handed her his phone. "Look at this, a leaked email thread. High-level city officials. Discussions about silencing Ava, about spinning the narrative." "They're scared," Carter said. "They should be," Ava replied. She walked into her office, grabbed a sealed file, the one with her own research. Judges, prosecutors, lobbyists, all tied to misconduct. She turned to Agent Pierce. I want this in federal hands, today. Pierce nodded. Then prepare. Because when this hits, the city won't know what to protect first. Ava looked outside where reporters were already gathering. Let them watch. Because this wasn't a court proceeding. It was a reckoning. By 8:57 a.m., the courthouse steps were packed. Reporters, protesters, survivors, signs raised, cameras ready. Inside, Ava dressed not in her robe but a dark navy suit, sharp, unyielding. Agent Pierce waited with her, Carter by the door. Final list, Pierce said, handing her a document. 12 names, 7 officers, 3 prosecutors, 1 judge, 1 city councilman. Ava's eyes stopped at the last one. Judge Holloway, her former mentor, the man who once told her, "You're the future." She closed her eyes just for a second. Then she nodded. Let's go. The courtroom buzzed like static. She stepped to the microphone. The room fell still. I became a judge to serve justice, she began. But justice must not only protect the powerful, it must protect the unheard. She held up the file. These names have been submitted for federal investigation, not for vengeance, but for accountability. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Ava's voice didn't waver. We are not here because of a slap. We are here because silence built an empire and someone finally said enough. The city held its breath. Outside, the headlines changed from allegation to investigation, from whispers to evidence. The mayor called for an emergency council session. Internal Affairs froze half a dozen officer files. And inside that courthouse, Ava Morgan had done what no one before her dared. She made the machine stutter. As she stepped down from the podium, a young law student grabbed her hand. You don't know me, but because of you, I'm not afraid anymore. Ava smiled softly. Not for the cameras, for the future. She returned to her chambers exhausted but grounded. Her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. She opened the message. You've made your point. Now stop. She looked at it for a long time. Then she placed her phone down, picked up the next file, and kept going. Because the storm wasn't coming. She was the storm. That evening, Ava returned to her office and found a voicemail waiting. She played it. Clara came the voice, precise, familiar, and surgical. It was Judge Holloway. I imagine you've seen my name by now. I imagine you feel betrayed. A pause. But understand what we built was necessary. We kept the system alive. Without us, chaos swallows everything. A longer pause. Walk away while you still can, or you'll lose more than your seat. You'll lose everything. Click. Ava stood frozen, the silence after the message louder than the threat. Carter entered moments later. Was that him? Ava nodded. He didn't threaten me. Worse, she whispered. He warned me. Then she turned to the mirror, touching the faint scar on her cheek. It was fading now, but it would never truly disappear. This isn't about me anymore, she said. It's about every lie wrapped in a policy, every cover-up signed in cursive, and every woman who was told to wait her turn. She turned back to Carter. Let's finish this. By midnight, the smear campaign had turned nuclear. Anonymous leaks, manufactured scandals, a photo of Ava at a protest twisted into proof of bias. One article claimed she'd fixed trials. A fake document circulated online. Her inbox was flooded with threats, taunts, and noise. They're trying to bury you in static, Carter said. Ava opened her desk drawer and pulled out a second binder. What's that, everything? I never said, she replied. Notes, records, conversations she documented and locked away. This isn't defense, Carter whispered. No, she said, it's fire. And she was done waiting. 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse was packed. Boon sat on trial, 5 felony counts. But the room wasn't watching him. They were watching Ava. When her name was called, she rose, not as a judge, but as a citizen. She took the oath and looked into the eyes of every juror. I was struck in the face by a man who believed I didn't belong, she began. But what mattered more was what that moment revealed. That power in this city wasn't just abused, it was protected. The courtroom went still. The badge didn't give me value. My humanity did, and it should have been enough. Her voice was calm, not angry, not theatrical, just undeniable. Boon's lawyer faltered. Cross-examination crumbled, and for once the law didn't look away. The verdict came 2 days later. guilty on all counts. But Boon was only the first domino. Judge Holloway resigned under pressure. ADA Reyes was placed under federal investigation. 3 captains stepped down. Ava watched it unfold, not with glee, but with gravity. This wasn't victory. This was exposure. And it was only the beginning. She stood once more before the public. This isn't about one officer, she said. It's about the system that gave him permission. A pause, and now we're rewriting what permission looks like. Because justice isn't loud. But when it arrives, it echoes. 2 months later, Ava stood in front of the State Judiciary Board. She wore black. Not in mourning, but in clarity. I am resigning, she said. Gasps. I believe in justice. But I also believe in stepping aside when the fight becomes bigger than one person. A board member stood. Judge Morgan, you've inspired a generation. You could lead the change. Ava smiled gently. Change doesn't need a monument. It needs momentum. And then she walked away, back to her small home, to her nephew's laughter, to a city that still had scars but also now had a pulse. As she stood on her porch watching the sunset, her phone buzzed again. A message. Because of you, I applied to law school. Ava smiled softly. She hadn't sought a legacy, but maybe she'd sparked one anyway. Not in a headline, not in a courtroom, but in someone else's courage. Justice is not a privilege for the powerful, it's a right for everyone. When one woman dares to stand, she gives a voice to thousands who were never heard. Never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who's had enough.